Today, we're happy to have with us Geraldine Dolan. She is from Pennsylvania. Her story is unique from all of the others. It seems there are no two stories exactly alike. So, Geraldine, if you would go ahead, please, and share your story.
Okay. And I want to thank you for having me on your show to be able to share our story. Um, our story starts with, our three boys, which whenever we go anywhere, we bring this picture with us. These are our three sons, Patrick, Joseph, and Bill. And our story, unfortunately, starts with tragedy for us with the loss of our son Patrick when he was 19 years old. It did not involve drugs, but that started our grief journey almost 14 years ago. And at the time, my son Joseph was 12, and my daughter Emily was 10, and my stepson was 21. And we unfortunately learned a lot about going through losing a child, which is not something that any of us, are taught to prepare ourselves for. But we did the best that we could. Like I said, our son Joseph was 12, and they were all very close before that happened to my son Patrick. They had a band. They played music just about every day. My son Patrick would get my younger kids off the bus before he went to work. And they would, play the guitar, write songs. And my daughter, Emily, who's autistic, they would have her recording it with the camcorder. So they were very, very close. And even my stepson would come up from Maryland, and he's the one that taught them how to play the guitar. And when Patrick was killed, he was murdered in 2010. We were just grappling for anything that we could to keep our family, sane, try to heal from this. And as parents, we were going through the motions of losing our son, but we really couldn't relate to our other children losing their brother. So they struggled as well. And my son Joseph really struggled. He, went through the point where he wouldn't come out of his room. We ended up having to pull him out of school and do cyber school. But then he would pull his, he would get it together, and he seemed like he was doing well. And he ended up going back to, by the time, a couple of years passed, he agreed to speak to a counselor. He would, we felt like, he was on a good path. And to share just a little bit about Joseph, he was the best baby. He was so smart. I mean, all of our kids were, but he was 2 years apart from our daughter, Emily, who had epilepsy when she was born. And he was such an integral part of her development and helping get her, where she needed to be, being so close in age to her. And he was shy, but he was just all of our kids were great kids. But Joseph was very special when it came to my daughter, Emily, and everything that she did, walking, talking. I mean, he was by her side all the way and taught me things, how to let go and let her be more, to show us what her abilities were and not her disabilities. And, so even though, he, with all of that, he still struggled with his grief, after losing our son, Patrick. And it was like his hero, and he was gone. So he ended up, one summer we're coming back from the beach, and he's like, "Mom, are you going to sign me back up for school?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I would love to sign you back up for school." He was about 15, I believe. And he ended up playing baseball. He was doing really, really good. He would have his moments where what we call like the dark place. He'd go back into the dark place, but we did too as parents, over the loss of our son, Patrick. But he finally agreed to speak to a counselor, and he was he was diagnosed with episodic PTSD because, through all of that, he had anger, he had a lot of emotions he was not dealing with. And then the ones, I guess he was dealing with, he was very angry, which was understandable. So they did put him on medication for depression and anxiety. And, he like, again, like he would do good, and then he would like just be depressed, fall back into like the darkness of grief. And, it's just, it's a very hard thing, I guess for a sibling to deal with. And so he actually was doing pretty good. I'd say for a good year or two. I think he may have self-medicated a few times, whether it be with alcohol or marijuana. But he was against drugs. He was not a kid to go out here and, go to parties, and things like that. But he had missed his appointment with his therapist and asked me if I'd call to reschedule it. And he had just turned 19. This was June of 2017. And I said, I'll call. I said, but you need to go because, when you don't go, they don't just call in your prescription, that you have to be there, for them to refill your prescription. Well, he missed the next one and he was out of medication. So he called my stepson down in Maryland and asked if he could get him something to help him with his anxiety. And so, and we didn't know about any of this until after the fact. We're about an hour from Maryland. And so he drove down there and got some pills that were it wasn't what he thought they were. And then he drove back to Pennsylvania. And about a mile from our house, he took one of the pills and it was a carfentanil, which is elephant tranquilizer. And he died instantly. And there was, nobody knew that he was there. He had told us that he was staying the night at a friend's house. So we weren't expecting him home. And my stepson didn't call. And my stepson didn't know what it was either. He didn't know. And my stepson also took one, but it also goes, fast forward, we now know so much more about fentanyl and how there could be some in one pill and not a whole bunch in another pill. And that's pretty much what happened. My son Joseph's, killed him instantly, and my stepson didn't die. So when my son didn't come home the next morning, or I didn't hear from him after texting him, I started getting worried. So I went on my phone bill, looking up numbers, where he could have been or whatever, and calling all the numbers. And then I saw my stepson's phone number and I called him and he said, yes, he was here last night. And I said, well, he didn't come home and we can't find him. And he didn't really say anything then, but as the day progressed, 7 hours later, which is how long it took us to find him, he was a mile down the road from our house in his car. And he had died. So then my stepson told us, what he had gotten, what he drove down for. We were hearing the backstory then. And it was just devastating. Our son, Joseph, was the last person that we would expect that to happen to. And it just, we joined a support group when our son Patrick died. So we did have a foundation of, grief, support. And all of our friends were here right away when our son Joseph died. But this was just a different kind of, this wasn't the same as when my son Patrick was killed. And it just, it just blinded us, as any parent would be blinded, whether they were doing drugs or not. My son did not know what he was about to take. And
so your son Patrick, what was the age difference between him and Joseph?
There were 7 years difference.
Okay.
Patrick was 19 when he was killed and Joseph was 12 at the time.
Okay.
Yes. And like I said, they were very close. And, I just think the grief took its toll and the depression. And, we did the best that we could, but we did everything that we thought was right. But, looking back now, we were not knowledgeable of how dangerous drugs were at the time, when this happened to our son Joseph. We didn't know what fentanyl was. We certainly didn't know what carfentanil was. And then, unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but Pennsylvania has the law where if someone dies as a result of, drugs, they investigate. And when I found out that my stepson is the one that gave them to him, we wanted to get to the bottom of it, where it came from. Mm-hmm. We knew that my stepson didn't do it on purpose because he took one himself. But unfortunately, my stepson was in active addiction and he too struggled after my son Patrick was killed. and my stepson was the oldest. He was 21 when Patrick was killed, and Patrick was 19. So them two were 2 years apart, and they were very close, very, very close.
So with Bill living that far apart from you, I'm guessing you probably did not know that he was struggling with addiction at the time.
We knew he was struggling with
You did.
addiction. We
Okay.
stayed in contact with him. My husband had gotten him into rehab before, but the scale of drugs that were out, when my son Patrick was killed, I don't know how many years it took for my stepson to become, addicted to drugs. But I know that with any of our kids, we did our best. We tried to help them. And my husband, got him into rehab. I want to say two times before my son Joseph had passed away. But when my son Joseph died, I told the police what I knew, the phone numbers that I had, called and where he was. And then they questioned my stepson, and my stepson told them what had happened, that Joseph drove down, that my stepson had gotten the pills and had given them to my son Joseph. And so I guess they agreed to go after the person that my stepson got them from. Maryland was hard to deal with as far as the police. And I only know that because my son Patrick was killed in Maryland, and that his is a cold case now. They didn't solve my son Patrick's case, which we have more information than probably the police do.
Wow.
But the police, I don't blame the police, because I'm sure their hands are tied in many respects. But so my stepson Bill was supposed to do a scheduled buy to go after the person that he had gotten the pills from. Well, he didn't do that. And so they arrested him. And he was brought to Pennsylvania. He was in York County Prison. But he was getting help. He was in a place where he wasn't, using drugs. And I know he felt guilty over the death of my son Joseph. And before he had gone to prison, I had said, if you want to go to rehab, we'll get you back to rehab. We don't want you to die. And I ended up going to Maryland and taking him to a rehab in Pennsylvania, 3 hours away, so he could get help. And his biological mom went and got him out. So after his hearing in Dover, where we live at, once he was arrested, he was in prison, I guess, for about 6 weeks, or I think maybe four weeks. And they ended up letting him out. And I pleaded with them to not let him go back to Baltimore, because if they did, it would just be a matter of time, that we would get the phone call. And it was 10 days later, my husband got the phone call. Then this was in 2019. I'm sorry if I'm jumping around, because it's so hard to just stick to one of our sons, since it's all three of them.
Mm-hmm.
But he had died in 2019 when he was 28 years old. But it's just, when our son Patrick died, he was such a vibrant young man. He was about helping anybody that was down on their luck, or if we were at a restaurant, he would want my husband to give them a tip or whatever. So we ended up doing like random acts of kindness in memory of Patrick all through the years after he died in 2010. And our son Joseph was part of that. We would make Easter baskets for like a children's group down in New York City. We would make Thanksgiving meals for the homeless. And he was part of that. We had a big basketball tournament because our son Patrick played basketball. So we kind of, I guess, channeled our grief into acts of kindness, because it just helped us. That's just what worked. And that's what we believe our son Patrick would have wanted us to do. But with Joseph, because of the cause of his death, we just felt like, we didn't understand a whole lot. Like we were still kind of in the dark. Like we were like, how did this happen? Like, how did we miss this?
Right.
And like a lot of people with the stigma, we're saying our son overdosed. We're saying Joseph overdosed. And I'll never forget, my husband and I, we were down in Maryland. We would, whenever asked to go speak, we would go speak about what happened to our sons. And we spoke at a place in Dundalk, and April was sitting in the chairs. We didn't know her at the time. And we were talking about, overdose, what had happened to our kids, and the things that we were speaking more of like a grief, as a grief, like how we handle our grief and what we're doing, and how, we don't, we try not to give up on our faith, and we try to find purpose even through the loss of our sons. just ways that we can go out into the community to help somebody else. And with Joseph's, it was to bring the awareness about the fentanyl because we didn't know about it at all. And then afterwards, she had come up to us and said, I heard about your story about your kids. I don't know how you and your husband do it. And she was like, do you really think your son overdosed on elephant tranquilizer? And that was like a light bulb. And I'm like, no, I don't think he even knew what he was taking. And I certainly don't think my stepson knew what he was giving him either.
No.
And that kind of what started me to research about fentanyl and to learn about it. And he'll be gone 7 years in June. And we've learned so much since then. And the backstory, where it comes from, where the precursors are made, how it's getting here, and met other families that are trying to spread awareness, which is what we're doing, like maybe just in our town here, but like I've gone to stores, like a cafe in Dover. My sister owns the cafe. There's a whole window display about fentanyl, and it has kids' pictures in the window. It has how many people are dying a day. I have a friend in Maryland who let me put a display up in her window. My husband too. My husband's a big part of all of this, helping whatever we do. He's right there with me. He goes and speaks in prisons about what happened to our sons, or recovery houses, just doing whatever we can. If we can get the message to one person, the hope is that this won't happen to another family. I mean, sadly it is, but I just think with all of the people that are trying to help spread awareness, I'd like to think it is saving lives, even in the wake of our tragedies of losing our 3 sons. I have a purpose. It's not the purpose that I had planned for us, but I know I get up every day for my daughter, Emily, and, we just do the best that we can to try to honor them, even though they're not here, by sharing their stories and, what wonderful children they are and were, just like all these other families that are losing their loved ones. And we had a billboard put up in Dover because we live right near the high school where my son Joseph went to high school, where he played baseball, where he played football. And I had reached out to a couple other moms, Olivia's mom and Zachariah's mom. I had reached out to them. So I put Joseph with their 2 children's pictures on a billboard in Dover, and people were seeing it and they were asking questions. They were coming into my sister's cafe and asking, what is this? People just didn't know, just like us, we didn't know. And I just think it's so important, that the awareness is out there because if we saw on the news every day that a plane is falling to the ground, crashing and killing all the passengers, that's gonna raise a brow. But sadly, that's how many people are dying. And we're not seeing that on TV. We're not seeing public service announcements about the seriousness of the fentanyl and how it's killing, all ages. And it's just, we're doing our best. It's not easy, but I'm glad to be a part of the good that's coming out of this. And, hoping that it makes a difference, and that in memory of our sons, that, we are making a small difference along with all the other families that are doing the same.
Well, no other family that I have been in contact with has lost 3 children like you have. That's beyond words. I don't know how you do it.
Well, it has to be God. That's what me and my husband think, because how could a human being get up and walk and do the things that we do and still be able to function or smile and do the things with our daughter, which I think our daughter's a big part of it too. We know we have to be there for her and be strong. So I think, I feel so bad when I hear people speak and say that was their only child. And then when people see us and they're like, oh my God, how do you even do this, losing 3 children? Even though they've lost 1, their loss is just as great as ours. Our numbers are just more, and of course the emotions are different, because of how many losses we've had. But we remember back when we lost our son, Patrick, and that grief was just as bad, as losing each of our sons. It's just multiplied times 3. But, we have our daughter, Emily, and some people don't have other children. And that makes me very sad, and, or grandchildren. So every story's different and unique. But, I still feel grateful. We've learned a long time ago to see the gratitude even in grief. And I'm grateful that we are able to see that and all the people that we meet in spite of our losses. It's brought a lot of people together, I think, and that's got to be the works of God, you know, and my husband always says that's what our sons would want. They wouldn't want us to give up.
Right. That's an incredible story, and it's so encouraging to see someone who has been through what you have, and yet you're looking for ways to help other people and looking to, take what Satan meant for harm and turning it to blessing. And that's what God would want all of us to do, but it's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And my husband says, God didn't do this. The evil
Right.
in this world did
That's
this.
right. Amen to that.
I believe that. I do believe that. And my mother-in-law would always say, God's going to take care of us and God's going to take care of them. So whoever's doing this evil, that's who the judge is going to be when they leave this world.
That's
And
true.
it's not for me to be angry or wish death upon other people, because I don't want to be that way. But I just told my husband, we just got to keep doing what we're doing. And people call us. I spoke to the Dover High School football team, showed a picture of my son, Joseph, and kids, they respond to that. Like they put themselves in that position of like, hey, that could be me, because they're young. And both of our sons were 19, but, died 7 years apart. And, yeah, I was telling them how we go to the rehabs and speak, and I bring pictures of our sons' headstones. Because the reality of it is, for these people in rehabs, we have empathy for people struggling with addiction. It's in our family, but there's a lot of recovery that we know that exists too. But sadly for these kids today, the one and done, like with our son Joseph, I mean, he may have experimented, but not to my knowledge as far as being an addict. They don't have the chance to share their story of recovery like they did years ago.
Right. He never had a chance.
He never had a chance.
No.
And that's, I think, what we struggle with. Even with my son, Patrick, he made it to the hospital and made it through surgery, and died, during surgery. But our son, Joseph, because I was saying to the police officer, do you think he suffered? And he said, I don't think he suffered. I think what he took him instantly. And, that doesn't give you any kind of, it doesn't make you it's still very sad, but he was alone in his car by himself. My son Patrick was with a friend, and my son Patrick fought back. He was able to try to, help, save himself, but and to hear about these young kids and babies, like every time we hear a story, it's so heartbreaking, and that because of people not being aware of how dangerous this is, we're going to keep seeing those if we don't keep trying to do what we're doing.
That's true. Well, I thank you for coming on with us today and sharing an incredibly difficult tragedy, 3 of them. God bless you, and thank you for what you are doing to bring awareness.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and hopefully we will have you on again another time.
Okay.